Inner Peace Better Health with Saima, where journey into the heart of healing, growth, and the human spirit. Tonight's guest, Dr. Chad Scott, is a licensed psychotherapist, university educator, and hashtag number one bestselling author whose life reads like an epic novel. From surviving illness and divorce to exploring the world's darkest places, from Hiroshima to Alcatraz, Chad has discovered that travel isn't just an escape, it's a mirror. So, if you have ever wondered how to turn adversity into adventure and pain into purpose, this conversation will shift your perspective. So, Chad, your story weaves together healing, hardship, and a deep love for travel. So, how did travel become a tool for resilience in your own life?
Well, it's kind of a long story, and I'll try to make it short. I've always loved travel. As a kid, I went to visit relatives all the time with my parents in the United States, and I really kind of took it for granted. And then as I aged, I started traveling on my own. And then with my son, when he was born, I was a single dad, and I saw it as a form of education for him. He was learning more traveling than I think he did in the classroom, and I started noticing it within myself. I became a lot more cultured and started traveling internationally and became even more cultured. Um, and when I was going through a hard time, and it really didn't strike me till it kind of goes hand in hand with my story of illness and divorce. So about 7 years ago, even 10 years ago, I started having autoimmune health issues, and um, and during that time, I also got divorced and had a lot of struggles with anxiety. Alcohol was a little bit of a problem after my divorce, and um, and I started going on a lot of adventure travels. I went to actually in Colorado, which isn't known for their alligators. They actually have an alligator sanctuary there, where they have these large ponds, and you go into the ponds, help the medical staff there get the alligators so they can inspect them and give them medicine. So you go into these ponds and you pull the alligators out by their tails and jump on their backs, and you know. And I've done a lot of things like that with scuba diving with sharks and venomous snake handling classes, a lot of things like that. And what I found is that it was profoundly helping my anxiety. Um, I did a lot of the traditional things, and those were helping. I went to therapy myself after my divorce when my anxiety was at its worst, and certainly the traditional methods helped. Um, but I would say traveling was um, by far the most helpful thing. And when I got sick, so I ended up getting really sick. I had autoimmune issues, and then I really had autoimmune issues with liver disease. And about 4 years ago, I started developing those symptoms, and I really couldn't travel and do a lot of the adventure types of travels anymore. So I did more. I went to Israel and uh, Egypt, um, Germany, and more places that where you could go to learn. And what I noticed is I was gravitating more towards dark tourism types of places, and I was getting a lot of um, by reflecting. I mean, I was going there to honor, and I have a real interest in history, so I was going there to honor people and reflect on their lives, and I'd go there with almost complete reverence for the things that happened there, such as going to Auschwitz with the death camp there, and Hiroshima, and as American, going to Hiroshima is like such a profound experience. And what I was finding is by reflecting on them, it was coming back and kind of mirroring my own struggles. And it really gave me perspective. It was almost like going to on a pilgrimage. And there's actually a really good book about that I was just made aware of about a month ago. That um, it was pilgrimage and dark tourism has a significant overlap, and I was doing a lot of dark tourism types of things. Um, but you go there for similar reasons as people on a religious pilgrimage. You're going there um, for insight into your own life and meaning into your own life. And I wasn't necessarily purposely doing that, but I think I was by going to those places. It showed me kind of what I was doing, and I ended up having a liver transplant a little over a year ago. And very first place I went, as soon as I could get permission to go, I think it was about 6 weeks after I had my transplant, I went out to Los Angeles. And it was on the second day I was in Los Angeles that I was in a cemetery, and it was the second day in a row I was in a cemetery, and I could all the things you could do in Los Angeles, I was in cemeteries. And it just occurred to me what I was doing. I wasn't there to gawk at celebrity, you know, headstones. I was there to really reflect and say thank you, and almost have a conversation with people that have passed that I've looked up to for years. And I noticed that that's kind of what I do in all these places. And that's when it occurred to me that I was seeking out dark tourism for a way to heal myself.
Mm-hmm. It's actually incredible how the landscapes you walk through can reflect the emotional terrain you're navigating. And you explore something called dark tourism. So, visiting places marked by tragedy, why do you believe these sites are powerful portals for personal transformation?
Why are they powerful portals? I think, it's like going to any type of religious institution, I think, where
Mm-hmm.
serious religious events had taken place, um, where you're walking on hallowed ground. Um, you're and when you're on hallowed ground, you feel this sense of it puts your perspective onto you. It shows you kind of your place in the world. That's like I'm just a person. I'm not I'm not a superhero. I'm not a, I'm a mortal person. And when tragedy occurs and we're standing there in the aftermath, many times centuries later, um, it hits you that, you need to live your life with purpose, and you need to live your life with intention. And I think that's really what I get out of dark tourism. And I think a lot of people too. If you looked at the statistics, at least in an American study it was a fairly large study. Around 85% of all people have been to dark tourism sites. So they're quite varied. And another 10%. So now we're up to 95%. So another 10% wanted and were planning to go to a dark tourism site. So 95% of people either have or want to go to a dark tourism site. And those can, encompass a lot of different things, it's cemeteries and battlefields, places where, serious crimes have taken place, uh, prisons, historic estates that have had, like the Tower of London, where they've, Henry VIII, had Anne Boleyn beheaded, and where, there's a lot of different places you can go, and it's very varied.
Mm-hmm. There's something sacred in standing where others have suffered. It's like our own pain is seen and held in that shared space, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that last part.
Mm-hmm. It's like our own pain is seen and held in that shared space, right?
Yeah, our own pain is, yeah, you can, when you go into those places, they act like a mirror to our own kind of soul. And for example, going into um, the crematorium gas chamber at Auschwitz, there's one that's still standing, and you're going down the steps where thousands of men, women, and children had taken their last few steps. And um, I remember my tour group had walked through to the next room, and I was just standing there in awe, just kind of picturing people suffering in there. And when you are in a situation like that, it you come out the other side of that building changed. It changes you. And, it's not comfortable. It's kind of like going to the funeral of a loved one, or seeing, tragedy up close. And, it's not you know, uh, not something that you enjoy doing. I don't enjoy necessarily going to dark tourism places,
Mm-hmm.
but I learned so much from them, and it's not a type of learning where you learn it on an academic level. Yeah, there is some of that, but you learn it on a soul level. You learn it on a emotional level, and that stays with you. So when I wrote my book, Beyond the Darkness, um, a lot of my travels came back to me emotionally. I remembered how I felt in these places, but I had to research pretty extensively because some of this stuff was 20 years ago. Um, I had to research, the various rooms I went into, and the circumstances of what happened in those places, because I couldn't remember the exact um, academic type information. But I definitely could remember how I felt moving from room to room there. I just couldn't place uh, exactly what was in those rooms, so I had to do that type of research.
Mm-hmm. That completely makes sense. Now, you're a therapist, a writer, and a speaker. So, what message are you most passionate about delivering through your work today?
Um, so as a therapist, I use a lot of self-disclosure. I've gone through so much, and to me, it would be a disservice to not um, talk to my clients about their their uh, how I've been able to recover from my own struggles. So I think a message that I want to, I'm just a human being. Just because I'm a therapist doesn't make me, um, it might make me more knowledgeable about certain coping skills and things like that, but I still had to do the work. And when you come to therapy,
Mm-hmm.
you you have to, I mean, the therapist can do the treatment, but you still have to do the work. You have to do the healing, and I think that's the biggest point I want to get across is, um, nothing's going to magically change you. You have to put in the work, and whether that means going and meditating, or going to a church service, or going to a dark tourism spot. And you don't have to have a lot of money to go to these places. I mean, you can do them locally. I live in northern Minnesota, one of the most beautiful places on earth. Um, and I don't have to go overseas. I don't have to, travel far to do dark tourism. You can walk through a local cemetery. You can, find places where, tragedies have taken place. You know, even I actually have a chapter, and I've never experienced anything, significantly paranormal. I did have a kind of a spiritual experience once that was pretty uh kind of cool and life shaking and at the same time. But um, it just um I don't know, it's just a great experience to go to these places, and you can do it locally.
So, do you think that storytelling or your own or others is a like part of what makes travel so healing?
I think it kind of boils back to what I was saying about standing on sacred ground. And I think anytime you put yourself outside of your comfort zone, um, you know, when you go to these places, you're facing uncomfortable truths about the world. People in a lot of these places were, they're they're put to death. Um, there is wars and fighting, and it has a lot to do with bad things happening. But what is important, and this is important in therapy too, is you can't come here. I'm actually in my office right now, so I'm saying here in my therapy office. You can't come here and, and not really dig in. you have to face some of those things that you don't want to face, and that's what you come to therapy for. Some people will come in and they have a lot of resistance over, months even. Some of them even years before you get to their uncomfortable truths, and they feel safe telling you. But a big part of growing is getting outside of your comfort zone, and whether you're going to the beach or going to a battlefield, it really doesn't matter as long as you're getting out of your comfort zone and doing a little bit more. And it doesn't have to be, for example, my greatest fear. I'm a pilot. I'm a hobby pilot on the side, and my greatest
Mm-hmm.
fear is, besides like family dying, but my greatest fear is jumping out of an airplane. And I was on a bicycle down in Texas last week, and I ended up going by an airport. I'm like, oh, as a pilot, you'd like to go to airports. So I went to this airport, and they had skydiving there, and I'm like, I kind of got sucked in, and I didn't want to, but I just had this feeling like I have to not be a hypocrite, and I have to face my fears, even my greatest fear. And some people's greatest fears might be public speaking or asking a girl on a date. I mean, there's greatest fears for it doesn't have to be big ones like mine. And um, so I went in there and they said 3 o'clock, we have an opening. And I said, well, I'm in. I didn't want to, but I reluctantly said I'm in. And I did it. And I conquered another fear. And every time you conquer a fear and you expand your comfort zone, um, you grow as a human being, and you tend to live happier. And that's sort of what dark tourism does too, is you can go to these places as long as you're not going for sensationalistic motives. If you're going there to kind of, gawk at, somewhere where people died and you don't have a whole lot of empathy for it, you got to go with a lot of empathy. Otherwise, you could actually end up, I could be doing more harm than good if you go in there with those mindset. Um, but if you go in there with a mindset focused on um, reverence and reflection and things like that, um, you you face your fears and you can grow so much out of it, and you can learn to be happier. You love with more intention. You just live with a better life because of it.
Mm-hmm. It's like when we witness other stories, especially in different lands, we remember our own with more compassion, right?
Yeah. Um, you know, kind of reminds me of a song that it says, live like you're dying, and when you go to dark tourism spots, it teaches you to live like you're dying. Um, and actually, when I was dying, I was dying of liver disease, and I still traveled. That's when I went to Auschwitz. I didn't go there as part of my book. I didn't even think of the book till like a year, well, almost a year later than that. And I went there, um, and I also went to Israel, and went to a lot of the religious places. I'm more agnostic than anything, but I wanted to kind of take a crunch course on religion because I was dying, and I didn't want, I didn't, I and there's a lot of places in Israel that a lot of dark things have happened there too. So
Mm-hmm.
just as many dark things as good things, uh, from a biblical type of standpoint. So um, going there, yeah, definitely uh, is a healing, especially when you're suffering. And I was suffering, and it taught me to go through the end of my liver disease. I what am I trying to say? I got back to the States. I was actually in Oslo, Norway, and I got back to the United States. I wasn't feeling good in Oslo, and I got back, and then my blood work just kind of tanked out, and I was on the transplant list a month later, and I was transplanted a month after that. And the experiences I had, especially going to Auschwitz, especially going to the variety of dark tourism spots, it gave me the strength. Like, for example, a good example of this is I got called to go to the University of Minnesota, which is where I had my transplant. Great place. And I was there and they said the family of the donor backed out, so I wasn't gonna get my liver. And it kinda reminded me of the troops on D-Day, where they stormed the beaches in Normandy, and they didn't know, if they were gonna survive once they crossed that beach. And I did think of them while I was there, and it made me think, like, you know, I have a mission to do, just like they had a mission to do. My mission was to survive, their mission was to survive and get to the other side of the beach and fight on. That was my mission too, and so that's how um it can come back and when you least expect it, those experiences, and it comes back and gives you strength.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Chad Scott, for reminding us that healing doesn't always happen in silence or stillness. Sometimes it happens in motion on the road or in the ruins of what once was. And for all our listeners, follow Chad's journey, dive into his books, and start planning your own inner adventure. Until next time, travel with intention, heal through exploration, and always carry courage in your carry on.
Yeah, it's been fun. Thank you so much. I just wanna just give a little plug for my book. You can find it at drchadscott.com. It's Beyond Beyond the Darkness, Transformative Journeys Through Dark Tourism, and it talks about my experience, and it's gotten excellent reviews. It's been called a must read, and just had a great review today from the San Francisco Book Review. Yeah, I can't remember exactly what it said, but just a glowing review. So I think it's going to be a worthwhile journey for anybody who picks it up.